Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Victor Newman, fortified with ruthless certainty and a sealed lab report, detonates a DNA stunner so explosive that it rewrites family histories, shatters commitment, and leaves Daniel Romalotti standing in the remains of a life he allowed. He understood, all because Phyllis Summers, brilliant, hopeless, and scarified of losing her son, kept a taradiddle alive for decades longer than anyone imagined possible, and when Victor eventually chooses the precise moment to reveal the verity, it's not just strategy, it's surgical, unfolding at a gathering thick with pressure where every regard carries history and every silence hides a armament, as Victor, cool and commanding, lays out the data with the merciless calm of a man who knows that verity, formally released, cannot be recalled, explaining that a discrete DNA test, initiated under the guise of commercial due industriousness, but motivated by a eating inconsistency in old records, has proven that the man Daniel believed to be his natural father isn't who he allowed. That the birth Daniel erected his identity around is a fabrication, and as the words hang in the air like bank after an explosion, Phyllis's face rains spouts of color because she knows the end has arrived. The reckoning she laid over with every taradiddle told, for Daniel's own good, every half, verity sutured into bedtime stories and proud mileposts. Every time she induced herself that guarding her child meant rewriting reality, while Daniel, blindsided and disoriented, quests for the familiar ground of certainty only to find it gone, replaced by a vertigo of questions. Who am I? Who prevaricated to me? What differently isn't real? And Victor, unyielding, continues, naming dates, labs, and chains of guardianship with a prosecutor's perfection, making it insolvable to dismiss as manipulation. Indeed, as Jack Abbott bristles at Victor's timing and Nikki's eyes soften with the knowledge that some trueness devastate no matter how precisely they're delivered, because the report doesn't just identify a different natural father. It links Daniel's DNA to a heritage tangled with old battles and buried secrets, entwining opinions made long before Daniel was born, opinions that Phyllis believed she could overrun, and when Daniel eventually turns to his mama, the room holds its breath, because this is the moment where love meets treason head on, and Phyllis, voice shaking but eyes fierce, admits it each, confessing that she knew, that she suspected first and also verified laterally, that she chose silence because the verity hovered to upend Daniel's sense of belonging, to expose him to the kind of chaos that chews people up in Genoa City, averring that every choice she made was embedded in love, indeed if it was defective, indeed if it was wrong. But Daniel hears only the echo of a continuance filtered through deception, recollections recontextualized in a twinkle, the pride in a lineage now false, the arguments and rapprochements now tainted, the confidence that came from knowing where he came from now stripped down, and as his wrathfulness ignites, it's not loud at first, it's colder, sharper, a controlled fury that cuts deeper because it's subdued, as he asks Victor why now, why expose this at this moment, and Victor answers with nipping honesty, saying that secrets rot institutions and families likewise, that Phyllis's taradiddle had come influence, and influence used is wasted, revealing that the verity also neutralizes a brewing trouble tied to commercial maneuverings and heritage claims, proving formally again that in Victor Newman's world, morality is secondary to outgrowth. Indeed, as he insists that Daniel merited the verity anyhow of the collateral damage, a claim that rings concave to those who know Victor's history, but still lands with inarguable force, because the substantiation is irrefragable, and the fallout is immediate and merciless. Daniel storms out, ramifying ties in a single decisive stir, declaring he needs space not just from Phyllis, but from everyone who stood by while a taradiddle shaped his life, leaving Phyllis collapsing into Nikki's arms, blubbing. Not just for what she's lost, but for the knowledge that love, no matter how fierce, doesn't vindicate deception. While Jack grapples with guilt over missed signs and Victor watches the chaos with the grim satisfaction of a chess player who has offered a piece to secure the board, yet indeed, he can't completely prognosticate the foreshocks, because Daniel's desolation ripples outward, impacting Lily, whose faith in translucency is tested as she wonders what additional people hide, and Lucy, who senses the fracture in her father and fears it'll swallow the fragile peace they've erected, while whispers race through Genoa City, alliances recalibrate, and old adversaries see occasion in Daniel's vulnerability, egging Phyllis to essay damage control with hopeless justifications and offers of evidence, remedy, time, anything. But Daniel's response is a silence louder than any argument, a silence that suggests a line has been crossed that cannot be uncrossed, as he begins digging on his own, determined to reclaim agency by learning the full verity about his natural father, uncovering a trail of ambition, contest, and choices that image the veritably traits he's plotted within himself, forcing him to defy the possibility that identity isn't just inherited but legislated. That who he becomes coming is a choice he must make without the comforting fabrication that formerly guided him, and as Victor faces subtle pushback from Nikki and indeed whispers of remorse from within his own menage, he doubles down, averring that son is the stylish detergent, indeed as Phyllis, insulated and regretful, starts to realize that her topmost fear, losing Daniel, has come true not because of the verity itself, but because of the times she denied him the chance to live with it, leaving Genoa City braced for the coming chapter, because when a taradiddle this big dies, it leaves behind consequences that refuse to stay buried, and as Daniel stands alone at the edge of a future he didn't choose but must now claim, one thing is certain: Victor's DNA stunner has changed everything ever, and the scars it leaves will shape the young and the restless long after the shock fades. The shock waves don't stop with Daniel's exit, because in Genoa City no verity exists in insulation, and formerly Victor Newman unleashes a disclosure of this magnitude. It becomes a living thing, shifting as it moves through every relationship it touches, forcing characters to defy not only what they did, but why they did it, and whether the apologies they've clung to for times can survive the harsh light now submerging in. As Phyllis, concave-eyed and raw, begins replaying her entire life like a courtroom exhibition, each choice scanned under the weight of consequences she can no longer overrun, flashing back the moment she first realized the verity about Daniel's maternity and how fear caught reason, how she induced herself that certainty would destroy him further than ignorance ever could, how she told herself that fatherhood occasionally meant choosing the lower wrong. No way imagining that the taradiddle would grow fangs. No way imagining that Victor Newman would be the one to tear it open with surgical atrocity, and while she spirals between remorse and defiance, torn between apologizing and defending herself, Victor remains unmoved, intimately reminding Nikki that in his world, survival demands clarity, that Daniel's ignorance was a vulnerability others could exploit. And yet indeed Nikki's can't ignore the eating discomfort that Victor didn't simply tell the verity. He weaponized it, timing the disclosure to maximize its impact. Icing that Phyllis would be rendered helpless, that Daniel would be destabilized, and that any contending claims tied to pedigrees, trusts, or influence would be decisively crushed, which sparks quiet debates within the Newman menage about whether Victor crossed a line indeed he shouldn't cross, as Victoria questions the ethics of crumping particular lives to cover commercial interests. Adam watches with a blend of admiration and apprehension, fading too much of himself in Victor's cold math, and Nick, ever caught between fidelity and heart, prodigies whether verity delivered without compassion becomes its own form of violence, while across City Daniel's pain manifests not as explosive rage, but as a grim unraveling, insomniac nights visited by fractured recollections that now feel offered, exchanges he renewals with new dubitation. Moments of pride that now feel like props in someone additional story, and as he isolates himself, rejecting Lily's attempts to reach him and ignoring Phyllis's decreasingly hopeless dispatches, he begins to question whether anything he's accomplished belongs to him or whether it was all erected on a foundation of falsehoods, a mistrustfulness that eats at his confidence and threatens to ail his career, because creativity, once his retreat, now feels defiled by query, as if every idea must pass through a sludge of "is this really me?" And when he eventually confronts Phyllis again, it's not with crying or gashes, but with a ruinous calm that scares her further than wrathfulness ever could, as he asks questions she can't answer, why she trusted herself to decide his verity, why she no way gave him the quality of choice, why she let him form connections and resentments grounded on a fabrication. And Phyllis, stripped of bravado, can only admit that she was hysterical of losing him, hysterical of getting the villain in his life, hysterical that the verity would make her unlovable, no way realizing that the taradiddle would do exactly that. And as Daniel listens, the consummation crystallizes that this wasn't just about protection, it was about control, about Phyllis demanding to be the mastermind of his world. And that consummation hardens commodity inside him, pushing him toward a painful but necessary decision to step back from her entirely, declaring that remission, if it ever comes, will take time and distance, leaving Phyllis shattered yet forced to defy the uncomfortable verity that love without honesty becomes possession, while Victor's disclosure also drags long, buried ghosts into the open, as the identity of Daniel's natural father reignites battles and undetermined guilt among those who knew him, egging rumored exchanges about once affairs, backstabbing still covered up, and choices that echo through generations. And as these vestments resurface, Genoa City buzzes with enterprise, each scuttlebutt stropping the cutter, turning Daniel into an unintentional symbol of how secrets metastasize, while Lily finds herself at a crossroads, torn between esteeming Daniel's need for space and stewing that his pullout will insulate him permanently, fating too well how silence can calcify into bitterness. And when she challenges Victor directly, criminating him of atrocity disguised as righteousness, Victor responds with brutal clarity, averring that Phyllis set the trap and he simply sprung it, that Daniel's pain belongs at the bases of the person who prevaricated, not the bone, who told the verity, a station that enrages Lily but also forces her to admit the uncomfortable complexity of blame, because without Victor, the taradiddle might have endured indefinitely, shaping Daniel's future without his concurrence, and yet without compassion, verity becomes a stranding ball, not a cure, and as the fallout widens, Lucy senses the shift in her father before anyone explains it, reading it in his silences and detracted gandas, and when she eventually asks if he's okay, Daniel nearly breaks, realizing that the cycle of secretiveness threatens to repeat itself unless he chooses else, egging him to covenant that whatever happens next, Lucy will no way inherit his pain through elision, a pledge that anchors him as he navigates the wreckage, while Phyllis, insulated and visited, begins seeking counsel, defying voices that challenge her narrative and force her to examine whether her history of manipulation and survival tactics dazed her to the humanity of those she loved, pushing her toward a reckoning she's long avoided. And indeed, as she insists she'd do anything to fix this, she must face the possibility that some damage cannot be undone, only lived with, as Victor, seeing the shifting emotional geography, remains watchful, apprehensive that destabilized people make changeable moves, and as Daniel digs deeper into his natural roots, uncovering trueness that both unsettle and empower him, he begins to see patterns. Ambition shadowed by recklessness, passion colliding with pride, that reverberate uncomfortably with his own struggles, forcing him to defy the idea that identity isn't fortune but influence, a glass rather than accreditation, and this consummation becomes a turning point, transubstantiating his desolation into resoluteness as he decides to reclaim authorship over his life, refusing to let either Phyllis's taradiddle or Victor's manipulation define him, and as alliances realign and grievances edge, Genoa City braces for the coming act, because secrets may explode, but their debris lingers, bedding itself in hearts and histories, icing that this DNA stunner will resonate for times, reshaping connections, testing commitment, and proving formally again that in the young and the restless, the verity no way arrives still, and formally revealed, it demands a price from everyone involved. The fate continues to consolidate, because in Genoa City the verity doesn't simply land, it seeps, threading itself through quiet moments and private reckonings, and as days turn into insomniac nights, the characters begin to realize that Victor's DNA stunner has altered the emotional climate of the city itself, creating a constant pressure that bends opinions and exposes fault lines long hidden beneath polished grins and rehearsed alliances, as Daniel, still raw but decreasingly bent, starts charting a path that surprises indeed himself, stepping down from familiar circles not out of malignancy but necessity, understanding that to heal he must strip his life down to what's plainly his work heritage, his love for Lucy, his capacity for empathy, and in doing so he inadvertently becomes a glass for others, forcing them to defy how important of their own lives are propped up by accessible narratives, while Phyllis watches from the sidelines, torn between the instinct to intermediate and the painful mindfulness that every attempt to fix affects only reinforces the veritably control Daniel is rejecting, leaving her scuffling with an identity extremity of her own, because for the first time, she must face the possibility that being a devoted mama doesn't vindicate her of responsibility, that intention doesn't abolish impact, and that love expressed through manipulation corrodes the bond it seeks to cover, a consummation that sends her twisting into recollections of once choices where survival trumped translucency, forcing her to question whether she ever truly trusted the people she claimed to love, while Victor, ever the mastermind, remains outwardly composed yet inwardly alert, fating that destabilized feelings produce power vacuums others will rush to fill, egging him to still shore up defenses, support alliances, and cover Daniel's movements, not out of concern but computation, apprehensive that a man stripped of vision can come either dangerous or redoubtable, and as Nick confronts Victor again, pressing him on the mortal cost of his tactics, Victor counters with a nipping observation that families erected on falsehoods collapse ultimately, arguing that he simply accelerated the ineluctable, an explanation that unsettles Nick precisely because it carries a grain of verity, forcing him to defy his own conspiracy in maintaining comfortable silences, while Victoria, decreasingly equivocal, begins to question whether the Newman heritage's preoccupation with control has crossed into moral corrosion, a study she snappily suppresses indeed as it lingers, because power, formerly questioned, becomes unstable, and across City Lily's tolerance is tested as she walks the delicate line between support and suffocation, learning that loving someone in pain means accepting their need to retreat. Indeed, when every instinct urges her to pull Daniel back into the safety of participated understanding, and when Daniel eventually opens up, it's not with answers, but with questions about heritage, choice, and whether Verity can ever feel kind, exchanges that consolidate their connection indeed as they admit the query ahead, while Lucy's quiet adaptability becomes an unanticipated anchor, her innocence stropping Daniel's resoluteness to break the cycle of secretiveness, and as he explains to her, precisely, meekly, that families are erected not just by blood but by honesty, he feels the first hint of peace since Victor's disclosure, realizing that translucency, however painful, offers a foundation sturdier than any taradiddle, while Phyllis, insulated and decreasingly introspective, begins defying the fear that drove her deception, the terror of abandonment, the belief that Verity equals loss, and as she peels back these layers, she recognizes patterns that extend beyond Daniel, touching every relationship she sabotaged in the name of tone preservation, a reckoning that leaves her both lowered and visited, as she wonders whether redemption requires acceptance of endless loss, while the city buzzes with enterprise about Daniel's natural father and what his heritage might mean, old rivals resurfacing with opportunistic curiosity, and as fractions of that man's history crop, ambition pigmented with recklessness, charm shadowed by treason, they cast Daniel's struggles in a new light, not as fortune fulfilled but as exemplary echo, egging Daniel to purposely reject the idea that blood dictates just, choosing rather to define himself through deliberate action, a choice that resonates still but forcefully, signaling growth forged in adversity, and as Victor observes this shift, he experiences a rare moment of nebulosity, fading in Daniel a strength that was part of his original computation, a memorial that Verity, formerly unleashed, evolves beyond its wielder's control. And indeed, as Victor refuses to admit remorse, there's an turnabout of mindfulness that some palms are deficient, leaving scars that no quantum of strategic foresight can completely anticipate, while Phyllis, eventually accepting that she cannot mandate the terms of remission, begins the slow, painful work of responsibility, offering not defenses but justifications stripped of defense, knowing they may no way be accepted. And as weeks pass, the original shock gives way to a quieter, heavier phase of fallout, where connections aren't shattered dramatically but altered irrevocably. Trust rebuilt, or not, through small, deliberate choices, and as Genoa City settles into this new reality, one verity becomes inarguable: Victor's DNA stunner did further.